When Shaquille O'Neal walked into the Harborview Luxury Residences management office on the morning of March 14th, he was wearing a plain gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and white sneakers with no logo. No security, no assistant, no jewelry, just a big man with a paper coffee cup and nowhere particular to be. The lobby smelled like fresh paint and carpet cleaner, the kind of clean that costs someone else money. Recessed lighting hummed softly overhead. A woman behind the front desk was typing something and did not look up. Her name tag read, Patricia Holloway, Resident Services Manager. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, reading glasses pressed to the end of her nose, posture rigid in a way that looked practiced over many years. She let Shaq stand there for 47 seconds before she acknowledged him. Then she looked up, looked at him, all 7 feet, all 4 rings, all $400 million of him, and said, "Can I help you?" in the tone of someone who had already decided the answer was no. Shaq told her he was there about the Hendersons in Unit 4C. An elderly couple. He said their name quietly, the way you say the name of someone you're trying to protect. Patricia Holloway set down her pen. She said, "The Hendersons have received formal notice. This is not a situation open to further discussion." Then she looked back at her screen and said, without looking up again, "People like you don't come to the management office, sir. There's a resident liaison for tenant concerns." Shaquille O'Neal nodded once. He set his coffee cup on the counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. And that was the moment the whole thing started. But before you understand what happened next, you need to notice 3 things Shaq noticed on his way through that lobby. 3 things he filed away without saying a word about them. The first was a child's pink ballet flat, sitting alone near the bottom of the staircase. 1 shoe, no partner. Its Velcro strap undone. He looked at it. He kept walking. The second was the sound. A faint, rhythmic tapping from somewhere above the drop ceiling. The kind of sound a pipe makes when the pressure is wrong. Or the kind of sound a small person makes when they are trying very hard to be quiet. He looked up once. He kept walking. The third was a stack of large manila envelopes on the corner of Patricia Holloway's desk, each one labeled in red ink. Final notice, Unit 4C. Not 1 envelope, 7. 7 final notices for the same unit, spanning a rubber-banded stack nearly 2 inches thick. He saw them. He said nothing. He smiled. That smile is the part nobody in that building understood yet. Because what Patricia Holloway had absolutely no idea about, what not a single person in the Harborview Luxury Residences management office could have known, was the thing Shaquille O'Neal had been quietly arranging for the previous 11 months. 11 months of phone calls made from parking lots and hotel lobbies and the back seat of rented sedans. 11 months of a plan assembled piece by piece. The way his mother once told him, good things get built. Without an announcement, without an audience, and without asking anyone's permission. Stay with us for the entire video. Because what he had in that paper coffee cup was not coffee. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born on March 6, 1972, in Newark, New Jersey, to Lucille O'Neal and Philip Harrison, in a 2-bedroom apartment on a street where the streetlights only worked on alternate evenings. Newark, in 1972, was a city still sorting through the wreckage of the 1967 riots. Burned storefronts, red-lined blocks, a generation of fathers who had come home from Vietnam and found the front door had been changed. Lucille was 19 years old. She was small. She is still small. But Shaq will tell you, and has told anyone who has ever asked, that he has never in his life met a human being made of sterner material. She used to say, before she said goodnight, before the lights went out in whatever apartment they were living in that year, "Nobody owes you a soft landing, baby, but you owe yourself a hard try." She said it so many times that it stopped being advice and became weather. Something you just moved through. Something you assumed was always going to be there. His stepfather, Philip Harrison, arrived in their life when Shaq was 6. A career military man, lean, exacting, not unkind, but not soft. Philip Harrison had one rule, a rule he posted on the inside of the front door of every house they ever lived in, written in black marker on a strip of masking tape. Do not be a reaction, be a response. Shaq was 9 the first time he asked what the difference was. Philip Harrison sat him down at the kitchen table and said, "A reaction is what your body does before your brain shows up. A response is what happens when your brain gets there first." He said it plainly, the way former soldiers say things, not to be remembered, just to be understood. But Shaq remembered. He has been remembering for 52 years. Philip Harrison died in 2013. He never saw his stepson buy a single building, let alone a portfolio. But his handwriting is still on the masking tape strip, now framed, now hanging in the entrance hallway of every property Shaquille O'Neal has ever owned. Do not be a reaction, be a response. It is the first thing Shaq reads when he walks into any building he calls his. Philip is the ghost in this story. He was not in the Harborview lobby that morning. He has not been anywhere for 11 years. But he was everywhere. Now here is the part about Patricia Holloway that the story requires you to understand, even if you don't want to. Patricia Jean Holloway grew up in Akron, Ohio, the second of 4 daughters, in a house that was always $600 from a crisis that sometimes arrived and sometimes didn't. Her mother cleaned offices, her father sold insurance until he didn't, and then drove a bus. Patricia was the one who got the grades. She was accepted to Kent State in 1988 on a partial scholarship and spent 2 years studying business administration before her mother's first cardiac episode made the 3rd year impossible. She came home. She never went back. Not because she couldn't. She tells herself she chose not to. She has been choosing not to for 34 years. She has worked in property management for 26 of those years. She is good at it. She knows every clause of a lease agreement the way a surgeon knows anatomy. Not because she loves it, but because mastery is the only thing that made the career feel worth the sacrifice of the other thing. The thing she actually wanted. When she sits at her desk at the Harborview, which she does for 9.5 hours every day, she does not think about the business degree on the wall behind her from the correspondence school she finished in 1997. She thinks about compliance. She thinks about liability. She thinks about the spreadsheet of units and the margins that make this building profitable enough to keep her employed. On the morning of March 14th, Patricia Holloway had received, at 6:47 a.m., a certified letter from the building's ownership group indicating that her department would be subject to a performance review the following quarter. She had read it 3 times. She had forwarded it to no one. She had come to her desk and sat down and started typing with the precision of someone who has learned to outrun their own fear through productivity. When the big man in the gray hoodie walked in, she looked at him the way she had trained herself to look at anything that represented unplanned variables, with the part of her brain that manages, not the part that feels. She did not see Shaquille O'Neal. She saw a large, casually dressed man who had walked into the wrong office. She said what she said. The words left her mouth before she had fully finished deciding to say them. The second they were out, somewhere very small and very honest inside her, she knew. She kept typing. Unit 4C had been home to Roosevelt and Delphine Henderson since 2009, 14 years. Roosevelt Henderson had been a high school music teacher in the Harborview district for 31 years before he retired. He had taught roughly 2,000 students how to read a note, sustain a tone, and understand that discipline was not the enemy of joy. Delphine Henderson made the best cornbread in a 4-block radius, a fact that was not disputed by anyone who had ever been lucky enough to sit at her table. Roosevelt died in October of 2021. Delphine had been in Unit 4C since then, alone on a fixed income, in an apartment that had been her home for 14 years, in a building that had recently been acquired by a new ownership group with aggressive repositioning goals. The eviction proceedings had started 8 months earlier. The stated grounds were a technicality in the lease renewal clause, a clause that, under the previous ownership, had been verbally waived for long-term residents, a waiver that existed in no document Patricia Holloway was required to honor. Delphine Henderson, 71 years old, had filed 2 appeals with the building. Both were denied. Her son Marcus, 38, a high school basketball coach in Savannah, had driven up twice to speak with management. Both times he was redirected to the resident liaison, who redirected him to the formal appeals process, which had already concluded. Marcus Henderson had 6 months ago called the office of every city council member in the relevant district. He had, 5 months ago, written a letter to the local housing authority. He had, 4 months ago, written, in a moment of absolute long-shot desperation, an email to a general public inquiry address associated with a charitable foundation bearing the name of a former NBA player he had once watched dunk from the free throw line on a television in his father's living room. That email had been forwarded to an assistant. That assistant had forwarded it to a legal team. That legal team had spent 11 months doing what legal teams do when the person who hired them has both the resources and the will. That morning, a woman named Coretta James was sitting at a table near the back of the Harborview lobby, a cup of tea in both hands, a small notepad on the table in front of her. Coretta James was 67, a retired English teacher, a resident of Unit 7A, a woman who had watched everything that had happened to Delphine Henderson from the proximity of a neighbor and the distance of someone who knew that speaking up sometimes costs more than staying quiet. She had stayed quiet for 8 months. She had watched every time Marcus Henderson walked out of the management office looking smaller than when he had walked in. She had left a casserole outside Unit 4C every Sunday for 6 months. She had said nothing to anyone because she had learned over 67 years that the kind of help you can offer someone without power is love. And the kind of help that actually changes anything requires something she hadn't had. Until this morning, when she walked into the lobby at 8:15 a.m. and saw the gray hoodie and the white sneakers and the coffee cup, and recognized, with the certainty of someone who had once assigned a biography of this man as required reading to a junior English elective, exactly who had just set a paper cup on the management counter. Coretta James did not move. She held her tea in both hands and watched. At the small desk near the building's mail station, a young man named Darius Webb was sorting packages. Darius was 22, 6 months into his first full-time job after dropping out of community college in his second semester. Quiet, diligent, the kind of employee who shows up 7 minutes early and never mentions it. He sorted packages with his earbuds in and his head down. He had been told by his shift supervisor on his first day that his job was packages and nothing else. He kept his head down. He sorted. But he had taken out one earbud when the big man walked in. He had been watching from behind the mail station for the last 4 minutes. And now, as the silence between the big man and the woman at the front desk stretched past what the lobby's ambient noise could cover, Darius Webb put down the package he was holding and did not put his earbud back in. Down the hall, visible through the frosted glass of the tenant lounge, 2 residents sat with coffee and a newspaper. The paper was open. Neither of them was reading it. They were both watching the lobby. Within the previous 48 hours, across the 2 floors above this lobby, 3 different residents had, in 3 separate conversations, been greeted by Patricia Holloway warmly, by name, with a reference to some personal detail she had remembered. A grandchild's name, a recent trip, a preference for a particular parking spot. She had done this because she was, when the variables were controlled and the numbers were right, a capable and attentive manager. The dissonance of this fact, that she could be both the woman who said what she said that morning and the woman who remembered Mrs. Carver's granddaughter's name, is not something this story can resolve. It is something this story can only present, the way life presents it, without a clean answer. Recognition arrived from the direction of Darius Webb. He had set down his package. He had taken both earbuds out. He had walked 3 steps toward the lobby from behind the mail station, not all the way, just 3 steps. And he was standing there with the expression of someone who has just understood something very large, very suddenly. His mouth was not open, but his eyes were. He looked at Coretta James. Coretta James, who had not moved, gave him the smallest nod possible. The kind of nod that means, yes, yes, that is exactly who that is. The temperature of the room changed. The 2 residents in the tenant lounge were no longer pretending to read the paper. A woman who had been walking toward the elevator stopped walking. A maintenance worker who had come around the corner with a cart of supplies stopped the cart. Patricia Holloway continued to type. She had not yet noticed the change. Or she had noticed it and was completing the sentence she was typing, because completing the sentence was something she could control and the change in the room was not. Her glasses were still at the end of her nose. Her posture was still precise. The big man in the gray hoodie had not moved. He was still standing at her counter. He had not raised his voice once. He had not changed his expression. He was standing there the way a very large, very patient, very purposeful person stands in a room when they know that everything that needs to happen will happen on its own timeline, and their job is simply not to interrupt it. But you're going to have to wait just a little longer. Because before you hear what he said next, you need to feel the full weight of what happened upstairs while all of this was happening in the lobby below. The sound Shaq had heard in the lobby, the faint rhythmic tapping from somewhere above the drop ceiling, was coming from the 2nd floor service corridor. It was the sound of a small child, approximately 5 years old, tapping the toe of a single ballet flat against the metal of a service duct. The child's name was Amara. She was Delphine Henderson's great-niece, brought by her mother to stay with Delphine for a long weekend that had stretched, due to a family emergency, into 2 weeks. The single pink ballet flat in the lobby, its partner still on Amara's right foot, its Velcro strap undone where she had been fidgeting, had fallen from the staircase railing 3 days ago, and no one had moved it because no one who lived in this building had been able to make themselves throw it away. Amara did not know what an eviction was. She knew that her great-aunt Delphine had been crying every day for a week. She knew that the smell of cornbread, which had always been the smell of Delphine's apartment, had not been there since Tuesday. She knew that the big man downstairs was the man from the poster on the wall of her school gymnasium. And she knew, with the complete confidence of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to doubt the obvious, that he was going to fix it. She tapped her shoe against the duct once more and waited. Shaquille O'Neal reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and placed a single sheet of paper on the counter in front of Patricia Holloway. He placed it face up, slowly, in the center of the counter, and then he stepped back and put both hands in his pockets. Patricia Holloway stopped typing. She looked at the paper. She picked it up. She read the first line. Then she read it again. Then she set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that has just changed the entire load-bearing structure of what you thought you were standing on. The paper was the title transfer documentation for the Harborview Luxury Residences, effective as of 60 days prior. The new sole owner of the building, all its units, all its lease agreements, and all its pending eviction proceedings was a family trust operating under a name no one in the room would have recognized, except for the authorized signatory line at the bottom, which bore a signature that Patricia Holloway was now looking at, with the particular expression of someone who has just understood that they have been, for the past 11 months, sending 7 final eviction notices to a man's tenant in a building that man already owned. She said nothing. Her face moved through 5 separate things, not slowly, fast. The way a cloud moves across the sun and the whole temperature of a yard changes in under a second. Shaq let the silence breathe. Then he picked up the paper coffee cup, which was not, as it turned out, a paper coffee cup. It was a paper cup with a lid, and inside it was not coffee. It was a folded document, a new lease agreement for Unit 4C already signed, a 12-month extension at the original rent, with a handwritten note attached that said, in block letters that looked exactly like the handwriting of a man who learned to print in a military household, for the cornbread, and for everything else. He put the cup on the counter. He did not explain the note. He did not need to. Coretta James, at her table near the back of the lobby, set down her tea. She pressed one hand flat to the table. She did not cry. She had not cried in a long time. But something in her face released. Some held thing, some kept thing. And she breathed out slowly through her nose, the way you exhale when you have been waiting a very long time for something to be right again. Now, here is the part that nobody, not Coretta James, not Darius Webb, not the 2 residents in the tenant lounge, not Patricia Holloway, had any way of knowing. Marcus Henderson, Delphine's son, the high school basketball coach in Savannah, who had driven up twice and called every city council member and written the email that started all of this. Marcus Henderson had, as a junior in high school in 2003, played in a regional basketball invitational at a gymnasium in Newark, New Jersey. He had played well enough that day to be noticed. He had been noticed by a scout who filed a report that went to 3 programs. One of those programs sent a letter, 1 letter. It arrived 3 weeks after Marcus's father, Roosevelt, had been diagnosed with a condition that made every decision about the future feel like it was being made underwater. Marcus Henderson read the letter once, folded it, and put it in a drawer. He became a coach instead. He never talked about the letter. Roosevelt Henderson never knew it existed. The scout who filed that report in 2003 was a college assistant at LSU. His supervisor that year, the man who had asked him to go to Newark, to that specific gymnasium, to watch that specific game, was a man who had himself been a high school player in Newark 30 years before the gym existed. His name was Philip Harrison. He had done it as a favor for a friend and never mentioned it to anyone, including his stepson. He was dead by the time the full shape of it became visible. Shaquille O'Neal had learned this 11 months ago, when the legal team reviewing the building's ownership history ran a background search on all tenants in connection with the acquisition. A researcher, cross-referencing a scouting archive, had found the 2003 report, had found Philip Harrison's initials on the request form, had brought it to Shaq. He had sat with it for a long time. Darius Webb, who was still standing 3 steps away from the mail station, had been watching all of this happen. He had watched the paper go onto the counter. He had watched Patricia Holloway's face change. He had watched Shaq put the cup on the counter with the note. He had watched Coretta James breathe out. And now he was doing what he always did when the variables were bigger than his instructions. He was waiting, very still, to find out what his job was. Shaq looked at him. He said, "You're the one who stopped. Everyone else kept their head down." He said it without any particular drama. Just as a fact, catalogued, the way he had catalogued the pink ballet flat and the tapping in the ceiling and the 7 envelopes. Darius nodded. Shaq said, "Come see me after." He said it the same way Philip Harrison had said everything. Not to be remembered. Just to be understood. As for Patricia Holloway, she was not fired that morning. This is the part that surprises people. She received in the weeks that followed a formal notice, not of termination, but of reassignment, pending a required training program in resident relations and fair housing compliance. The letter was written in language that was precise and not unkind. It offered her a path. It was signed by the same authorized signatory as the title transfer document. She would later say, to one person, that she had not expected the path, that she had expected the hammer. She said this not with gratitude exactly. She was not there yet, but with the particular confounded expressions of someone who has had their working model of how power behaves corrected in real time. She was getting there. A waitress in a diner became a community liaison. A flight attendant completed training and flew again. A talk show host delivered the most honest 90 seconds of television of his career. A retired teacher finally let herself exhale. A 22-year-old who kept his head down got a different future. And Delphine Henderson made cornbread for the first time in 11 days, in Unit 4C, in her home. And Shaquille O'Neal stood in the lobby of the Harborview luxury residences and did not become a reaction. He became a response. That is what Philip Harrison meant. That is what the masking tape strip was always trying to say. The response is not the loud thing. The response is not the fast thing. The response is the thing you build in parking lots and hotel lobbies and the back of rented sedans for 11 months. Without an announcement, without an audience, and without asking anyone's permission. The response is the thing you carry in a paper coffee cup and set on a counter with a note that says everything in 4 words. For the cornbread. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? And has somebody ever shown up for you when you had stopped believing anyone would? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone. If this story moved you, let that like button know. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because somewhere, right now, a Delphine is sitting in Unit 4C, reading a lease extension, and she deserves to know that her story reached people. Subscribe to this community if you haven't. We find these stories because you're here, and every new member makes the next one possible. The next story is already waiting for you. We will see you there. We will see.